All right, it looks like we're live. So, welcome everyone to the next episode of the Cocktail Apocalypse Happy Hour at the End of the World. I'm Nick Mather, host of the Rebel Spirit Radio podcast, and I am joined, as usual, with my dear friend Stephanie Boudet. Yes, thank you. And Jeremy Anderson.
Yay, let me do that again.
Yeah, who also hosts the Kill Devil YouTube channel, where he makes awesome cocktail recipes for rum. So, all right. So today's topic, when we were discussing this, especially kind of titles for it, at first I was thinking American Apocalypse 2.0. But looking back, we actually already did an American Apocalypse 2.0. So this would have been 3.0. What we did first, I think our very first episode on this was just kind of looking at apocalyptic themes in American political and religious history. And then we did one, I believe it was in October of last year. So it would have been before the election. And I think we looked at sort of apocalyptic themes in the election. And so now we're sort of looking at kind of the aftermath. And so decided to call it, the big, beautiful apocalypse, in reference, of course, to the big, beautiful budget bill. But we don't want to limit it to just that. And the starting point has been kind of up for grabs. But I thought that a good place to begin, and this is Stephanie's suggestion here, was with the floods in Texas. And because Texas, the flooding is kind of apocalyptic and biblical in many ways.
Yeah.
So, what do you have to say about the floods?
First of all, horrible tragedy.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
A horrible tragedy, and also one that I suspect could have been much alleviated if they had had the proper notification that a flood was coming.
Yeah.
And it looks like, there's a perfect storm meeting where the community didn't have enough equipment. They didn't have the siren system.
Right.
And then you had the lack of information coming out of NOAA that's been decimated, and the National Weather Service that is part of NOAA.
Yeah.
And we know that a few miles down in Comfort, Texas, they all survived. They were flooded as well, but they got that warning. They invested, the community itself invested in sirens, and they got the warning that they needed, whereas this other community did not get that warning.
Right.
Yeah.
And didn't they vote on this? And the Republican component voted against warning systems? Do I have that correct?
I'm not sure about that. I
Okay.
do think that they I think you're right, though. They did not vote to upgrade it.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and the Doge cuts did not help at all, because these were some of the positions that were responsible for communicating what's happening. And if you fire these people just randomly without knowing what they're actually supposed to be doing, this is the result. And this is going to be not just with Texas and floods, but almost everywhere in the nation.
Right.
Some communities may be a little bit better off if they have, invested in early warning systems. But this is also something that is, I think, going to be a concern as we head into hurricane season.
Right.
And, all of our, weather seasons is going to be concerning, be it hurricanes or blizzards or tornadoes.
Wait. In the words of one of Trump's appointees, we have a hurricane season?
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Which appointee was that? Could have been any of them. Yeah, it could have been any of them. Yeah. But I think the underlying point here is that Americans are going to die. because of this. And that's not good by any stretch of the imagination. And what is going to make this even worse, I think, kind of looking at the big, beautiful bill here, and we'll probably kind of like step in and out of it as it is applicable. But one of the features of the bill was a rollback of clean energy incentives. And so that means they're repealing the electric vehicle credits and clean energy tax breaks. And that also jeopardizes over 120,000 clean energy jobs. And it is jeopardizes investment, and it's going to drive pollution up. It's going to drive up what is causing climate change and what's causing bigger storms and more flooding because there's more moisture in the atmosphere.
We have some comment here from two travelers. It looks like that they got stuck in the middle of the flooding and had to take shelter in Comfort.
Wow.
And they're also saying in Kirk County, they took money from Biden and used it for pay raises rather than building an emergency warning system.
Wow.
Some officials said they didn't want woke money. So that's thank you to travelers. That's really good information.
Yeah. They're one of my patrons, actually. So,
hey,
very, very grateful for them and their input. They comment a lot on some other videos. But yeah, that's really good information to know. The other things, kind of along the lines of the what's going to happen is big oil and coal and some of these other corporations are going to be able to get massive polluting projects endorsed just by paying a fee. All they have to do now is just pay a fee, and that allows them to sidestep environmental review and community input. And, one of the things is, the land grab was removed when the bill got to the Senate. This was proposed by Lee in Utah, I think. But yet they're still opening a lot of our public lands to development. And that, in my mind, this is inherently kind of anti-American because it's for a number of reasons. I don't want to go on a prolonged rant about that, although I could. But there's a reason that we preserve some of our national lands. And, the real quick reason behind that is because when we started doing this under, especially under Teddy Roosevelt, the idea was to allow future Americans to experience what the continent had been like as we were, as the continent was developing, right? And good and bad, right? Good and bad with that. But there was also this religious element in preserving the land, especially out of John Muir, that Americans needed to be able to explore the wilderness in order to encounter divinity in many ways. And so just showing that there's no respect for the land and opening them up for development, for oil and coal and for lumber, it's sacrilege as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I agree with that. It is. And it also shows a great disregard for the people, the masses, and just concern for corporate gain of some sort, whether it's the land or the money coming from whatever industry that they're using to pollute.
Yeah, and the bill further subsidizes oil and gas. And this is, it's thought that this is going to lead to higher costs One of the statistics that I read was that the average annual electricity cost is going to go up by $110 per household. And this is as early as next year, with some states seeing more than $200 increases annually. Businesses are going to face increased cost for all of this. And chances are, this is all going to be passed on to the consumer.
Right.
Yeah, they've also, like, if you're with Excel, they have a system where if you do your laundry or your high maintenance stuff, washing dishes, whatever, at certain times, you get discounted rates. And if you do it during peak times, you get hiked rates. They just changed that so that now it used to be like at 7 p.m., you could, do all that stuff and you'd be fine. But they raised that to 9 p.m. now.
Wow.
And it's like, yeah, when most people are going to try to go to bed and get some rest.
Right.
Now they, if they want to save money, they have to do their laundry.
Yeah.
Already time taxed, right? So much for everything we do. And
yeah. Well, that's good to know because I've been putting things in the dryer at 7 p.m. So now I will wait. Although, we should put them outside to dry when possible. Although it's difficult in Colorado because it rains almost every day for at least 15 minutes.
We've had a number of, if not rainstorms, windstorms coming through. So it's kind of hard sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and, I also think that, kind of focusing on the environmental aspect, and this isn't necessarily part of the big, beautiful bill, but it's not all that far removed, is that, and I can speak from personal experience with this, is the defunding of federal programs like NOAA, whatnot, how that's going to affect research universities. Because I was with one of the major engineering schools in the nation, and they have some really real concerns because they didn't know what kind of funding they were going to get because they have relationships with NOAA. They've got relationships with the various scientific organizations. And, the course I taught was essentially a environmental ethics class. And there was concerns about, can we continue to teach this? Because some of the ideas that are inherent in environmental ethics are things like environmental justice, environmental racism. And it's like, can we actually discuss these things? Or are we going to get in trouble by presenting them? And, I applauded the school for including this, and it was mandatory for all freshmen to take this course. But what happens when you start removing all of these questions out of scientific disciplines, and you aren't thinking in terms of how what you're working on affects the community, how what you're doing affects the nation.
Right.
Yeah, when you defund all of that, what we have is people who really, we've always had a society that had a limited grasp of science, had a limited grasp of environmental studies. And now, if you're afraid of teaching that you'll lose your federal funding for that, to me, that feeds into what we call the information apocalypse, right?
Yeah,
right.
Because now we don't just have a lack of understanding with the sciences, with the environment, with climate change, but all sorts of false information being elevated as an equivalency to the actual data, the actual reality of what's happening. So many people will have a really poor grasp as we keep going of what's
Right.
actually happening out there, especially with regards to the environment, safety concerns over disasters, just.
Right. And that ties into the cuts in education in general too.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, education and FEMA,
Yep.
wanting to get rid of FEMA there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have some notes in terms of education, so we can get to that. But let's kind of linger just a moment on the environment and see if there's anything else that either of you want to mention before moving on to another topic. As far as I'm concerned, the environment, climate change is the specter that is kind of behind everything.
Right.
And if we don't take it seriously, which we're not, it
Right.
is going to have profound impacts on the nation and the world.
Right.
Well, one of the things that really caught my attention was a meteorologist basically talking about, he would, like last year, telling the people, okay, don't worry about this hurricane. It's going to turn. Trust me on this. And it did. It turned. And now he's telling people that I can't give you that data anymore. I don't.
Right.
We can't. We don't have data we can trust.
Yeah.
So that's going to impact evacuations.
Mm-hmm.
And a whole lot more people are going to get hurt or killed in these environmental catastrophes that are occurring, and I believe there was another, I don't know if any of you watch him, his name is Ryan Hall, he does weather. He was actually talking about this as well, saying that the data we're getting, it's just nowhere near what we need to accurately predict how a storm's going to turn, how much water it's going to dump, what wind speeds are. It's and that's not the only, hurricanes aren't the only type.
Right.
If you remember, I mean, of course you remember, this year, I can't think of a single week that passed by without a major tornado outbreak.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, I think I'd like to say everyone really pay attention to what's going on, but you can't because there's no accurate predictions. Maybe look at the European models for more accurate predictions.
Yeah. Yeah, Europe is going to whoop our asses, I think, in a lot of ways. And that's, I hate to say that this is of the good, but maybe it is in the sense that with Trump alienating our allies so much, this is actually forcing a lot of Europe to step up to the plate.
Right.
But it's going to be to our detriment. It's going to be to the U.S. detriment.
Right. And China is already stepping up too. All the cuts to U.S. aid across the world, China is stepping in to fill those gaps, and so they're exercising their soft power. In addition, the whole green energy thing, China is investing heavily into green energy.
Yeah.
So that is the future of energy, right? So where are we going to be in 20 years?
Yeah.
We're going to be at the bottom of the barrel, and this is self-inflicted, and it's just disgusting.
Yeah, it is. And, when we talk about, jobs, it's like I had mentioned, that this is with the big, beautiful bill, there are over 120,000 clean energy jobs that are going to be jeopardized here. And one of the things that I hear a lot, kind of shifting into education, is, and I agree with this, is we need to rethink a lot of what we tell young kids to do in their futures. That a college degree isn't necessarily the path to take, and that there's nothing inherently wrong with vocational skills, because we need people to do these things, right? And that's one of the things. It's like we could have invested in in terms of vocation, training people to install solar panels.
Right.
They don't have to go into all of this student loan debt in order to get educated, to get trained to do that. and it's only going to benefit the entire nation.
Right.
But we're not actually thinking about these sorts of things so much. There was I don't remember the name of it. It was a town in Kansas that about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, got completely decimated by a tornado. And they had to like rebuild. And they intentionally made the decision to rebuild green.
Yeah.
And they had some exceptional outcomes from that. But it seems to me that, focusing just on the oil and the coal, the way things have been, ignoring climate change is detrimental in so many different ways. And that's my major criticism against the Obama administration, that they could have passed a sort of new Green Deal. Yes, Republicans are going to scream at the top of their lungs that it's all socialism, but it doesn't matter, because that's where the jobs are going to be.
Right.
And it's something that could help actually save the nation in the long run.
Right.
Yeah, I'd also like to point out that many businesses are moving more to green energy because they realize what the future is going to be, and it's not going to be in oil and coal.
Yeah.
Right.
And so it's good for them to get a jump on this, because they know their competitors outside of the U.S. are already doing this. It only makes sense if you understand what's happening, with the climate, with peak oil, with, how bad the fossil fuel industry is. So if you jump on the train, you're ahead of the game. And, like businesses that I work for, is already looking to be net zero, by, I think they're looking at 2040, which might still be too far off. But they are doing it, and they are using this technology. The problem is it's still very expensive to invest in. So it does help when the government gives incentives for that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and there's and this isn't like budget or anything, but there are so many things that are just like little minor tweaks in terms of how we approach things. And I think that this sort of American individualism can harm it sometimes. So my example is in last December, I was in Belgium for a few days and went to this Christmas market, right? And it was amazing because you were served not on paper plates, not with plastic cups or plastic utensils. You actually got a real plate, you got a real glass, a real mug, real utensils. And what happened was you got a small fee that you paid, but that was given back to you at the end. So you were able to go to various places and fill up your mug, fill up your glass, get the food, whatever you wanted on the same plate. You weren't creating waste. And when you were done, you would just go to this tent and they would give you a refund of what you paid. And then all that stuff was reused, cleaned and reused. And it's like, yeah, there are very simple solutions in many ways. But I when I was there, I just could imagine American, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to throw my stuff away. I don't want to have to go stand in a line and get my refund. And it's like, just think outside. We just lost a couple people when I was talking about that because Europeans are socialists. But there's a lot of very simple solutions that we're not educating people on. We're not getting the message out, and it's and the
counter programming is so strong.
Yeah, it is. It is. So. Jeremy, you had mentioned education. So let's shift into education a little bit here. And the big, beautiful bill restructures student lending. So, and in a way, that's not necessarily horribly bad, because our student loan system here is the worst.
Yes.
It is absolutely awful. But it does some other things too that aren't very good. So, for example, there's more funding for private schools, which is not necessarily of the good, especially if those private schools are doing things like teaching creationism, for example, rather than evolution. And there is concern about access to education for low-income students. Now, what I want to focus on is something close to my heart, is the student loans. Now, this wasn't part of the bill, but on Monday this past week, on June 7th, Trump signed an executive order June 9th, that, as far as I understand correctly, forbids any future president from forgiving student loan debt. It is essentially canceling the public service loan forgiveness program, which I know, Jeremy, you had benefited from. Yep. But even people who are like partway through it, with like me, that it's coming to an end. It's canceled for anyone who works for a quote unquote illegal agency. But if you read the fine print, what that means is any organization that has DEI policies, which is a lot of the schools. So, like, for example, one of the schools that I taught at was East Los Angeles College. And I have been really happy to see East LA, and the population at East LA is like 75% Hispanic. They have not backed down in terms of DEI policies. In fact, they're actually taking a very firm stance. Like, no, this is something that is important. This is something that needs to be considered. But the other thing that is part of the bill is that it's going to make the income-based repayment plans more stringent, so only a few people qualify. My understanding is about only 10% of people are going to qualify for the income-based repayment plans.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. The education apocalypse, we did an episode on that a couple months ago. This is so catastrophic to us. You know, when we look at not having a decently educated populace, those numbers are going to start going down further, because most people are going to look at this going, what's the point?
Yeah.
What's the point? I can't, either your interests have been eliminated from universities because they don't generate enough money, or the information you're getting is incorrect and in alignment with the government, rather than being like just objective.
Right.
And then all this war on DEI is going to be catastrophic to the non-white community that we have. I mean, this is so many different people. It's brown people, black people, women, LGBTQ, which are all going to be so negatively impacted by this. And I don't know what you do when you have a government set on destroying education. It is public enemy number one, to me, that you have an educated populace that might not vote for you. Well, there's a lot of other things that you are, shooting yourself in the kneecap over.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Scientific development, basic scientific research, technological development. We're neutralizing almost entirely our ability to compete in the future world.
Yes.
Yeah. And, I want to say that education, we can look at our K through 12 education. And then there's, the higher education, the community colleges and college and whatnot. With our K through 12 education, there's too many politicians with their fingers in the pots, I think.
Right.
And in terms of what that education should entail. And I have seen in 20 years of being an educator, as being a college educator, I've seen a noticeable decline. And, it's like, I'm on the verge of going elsewhere to teach. And I've never wanted to teach, like middle school or high school. But as I was grading college papers and commenting, you're supposed to capitalize the first word of every sentence. I thought, this isn't going to be all that different. There's too much emphasis on the testing, but this is all that's part of the education apocalypse, I think.
Right.
But there is this anti-intellectualism that runs throughout the United States, our history, which is unfortunate because we need educated people. One of the things that bugs me to no end is whenever I see on social media these ideas of student loan forgiveness, there's always someone who's going to come in right away and say, you took your loan, you pay your loans back. Student loans are the only loans in the United States that do not have bankruptcy protection. And bankruptcy protection is something that is in the Constitution. And I also don't think that we should be forcing students to go into so much debt. I'm dating someone who has a master's degree that they got in Poland. They did their undergraduate degree in Serbia. They did their master's degree in Poland. They have zero debt from it because education is seen as contributing to the public good.
Right.
And the other thing in my little rant here that bugs me to no end whenever these things come up are the people who are like, well, okay, we can, maybe give money for some degrees, but all these worthless degrees like philosophy and humanities and everything, no, those are worthless. And that really bothers me from a number of reasons. Coming from a perspective of someone who has a degree in philosophy and religious studies, and I'm in good company here. In the sense that philosophy is critical thinking. And so many companies now on their hiring, they want people who can think critically.
Right.
Yeah.
And, my criticism is this isn't something that should be saved until college. This is something that should be addressed in K through 12. One of the classes,
definitely.
One of the classes I've taught for a long time was critical thinking. And I've said forever that it's scandalous that I have to teach critical thinking at college.
Yeah.
Because by the time that the students get to college, it's a little bit too late.
Yeah, they should be getting critical thinking at age-appropriate levels throughout K through 12. K through 12.
Right.
It should be taught you start when they're very young, introduce the topic. Yeah, I mean, I've taught it at the community college level, and really by then, so many ideas that people have are cemented already, and they're more likely to be dubious of a critical thinking class than they are stuff that they're is shoveled at them in social media every day.
Yeah.
So it's like, this is the time of our lives where critical thinking is the most important skill.
Right. Yeah. Especially with the rise of AI.
Exactly. The AI, apocalypse that's coming towards us, where it's hard to distinguish deepfake. It's hard to distinguish. I saw videos the other day. Someone did a a video in they were in an airplane, and it was like the Ayatollah Khomeini with pushing Netanyahu out of a plane with and took his parachute, and then Trump jumps in and goes to rescue him. Now this was a comical thing. Putin was at the end. He was shoveling a grave. And so it was a comical thing of the current political situation going on. But honestly, just to look at them, it was so realistic. You thought that these were at least actors, but they weren't actors. They were just AI generated lookalikes of these political people. And sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, no, continue going. I'll catch it in a bit.
No, I was just, as far as it was a comical thing, I think the point is that it was so lifelike that if you didn't know what you were looking at, you might think something like that was real.
Yeah.
Right. But the danger of AI is not just deepfakes. MIT just released their first study on the long-term impacts of AI use on critical thinking. And it shows that people that rely heavily on AI have less ability to think critically. So it's gonna be a snowball. The more you use AI, the more you're going to need to use AI because you can't think critically yourself, and the less you're going to be able to distinguish what's real and what's not.
And if you don't know the basics of, like, say, how to write a 6-paragraph essay, and you just have AI do it for you. And so you never even have to learn it, or at least you think this. If anyone who has read an essay that only is generated by AI, you could usually tell. Because they don't know enough to know that AI gets things wrong. It's not foolproof, at least not yet.
Well, it's not even that's true. It's not foolproof. But the essays, for example, they can be legitimate essays. I mean, they can get all the information right. But it's kind of easy to spot because they follow a pattern. You can tell. I mean, because I've taught, community college for 20 years, and I've started noticing this a couple years ago when I was teaching ethics. I flunked 75% of an ethics class because they were using AI for their discussion posts and for writing their essays. And I have no love for Linda McMahon, who's, running the Department of Education, but there is, she has made a comment about weeding out students who are sort of scamming the system. Right. And I am in favor of that because this is what we've seen. There was for a while, and this goes back to, I don't know, I think I first started saying it right around the time that we were just about coming out of the pandemic. So I'd say like 2001 or so, where you got what was referred to as student bots. And these were fake students that were enrolling for classes somehow and populating courses, but they weren't real boys and girls, and I was able to catch them. I was teaching in Southern California, and I noticed, it's like, look, if you teach at a school that is 75% Hispanic, you can pretty much guarantee that someone who has enrolled in your class and their name is Herbert Worthington III, they are not a real student. Right? And so I started noticing like their addresses would also be outside of the area. And then, one of them I noticed they had like an address, was in Pasadena on Colorado Boulevard. Colorado Boulevard's the main street that goes through Pasadena. It's the road that the Rose Bowl parade goes along. And it's where the community college sits. And I noticed someone had their home address. as this address on Colorado Boulevard. I'm like, but there aren't any houses on Colorado Boulevard. And so I was able to like drive by, and I'm like, it's a gas station. It's not a house, it's a gas station. And so it became, this is something that the schools all were like, okay, we gotta work on these. But now you've got these other students that are coming in, your Herbert Worthington the thirds again. But what they're doing is they're just using AI. And now they're just referring to them. I don't even remember what they're referring to as bad actors is what they're calling them. I'm like, well, it's a little bit more than that. And so the use of AI, and we had a whole episode on the AI apocalypse.
Right.
We should probably do another one. We have to kind of like keep repeating ourselves, I think. But in terms of education, we're going to have to address this. How do you teach students, because AI is not going to go anywhere. How do you teach them to use it ethically, I guess? And how do educators use it ethically? And how do educators use it? Because I've used AI to help me construct better essay prompts, because I'm really bad at essay prompts. So I would like write out, okay, here's my essay prompt. Now help me make it better.
Right.
But I saw one student somewhere was like suing because the professor was like, okay, students can't use AI, but the professors are using AI. So we actually have to find a nice balance in there, how to use it and to think critically about it.
Right.
It's a mess.
Yeah. And two travelers just pointed out again that the AI data centers are becoming a major source for carbon. So
yes.
It's also it's dirty, very dirty.
It uses massive amounts of energy. And there's, where is it? I forget the location, but it was one of, I think it's in Louisiana. I can be wrong about that. And this is in regards to Musk and the Mecha Hitler, Grok. But they were allowed so many generators for it, but then they had all these additional generators that they weren't reporting. It is incredibly energy intensive.
Yeah, and then there's a lot of problems with the data centers and how they pay people in like the gig economy for the data, and it's extremely abusive in terms of what they get paid. Micro jobs that are coming out of it. Oh, just
for people with advanced degrees. I recently, I've been avoiding it, but I applied for one of these positions that was supposed to be about looking at responses and helping draft responses and questions as well for AI. And I got the thanks but no thanks email, but then it was followed up. But you can look at this for graduate students in doctoral master's programs, and it was essentially working for free.
Yeah.
But the pay itself wasn't any good. They're actually offering like $20 an hour for people with advanced degrees. And it's like, that's like $3 more an hour than McDonald's. And you're requiring me to have a master's degree or a PhD.
Right.
Yeah.
So yes, so the AI, that's we went down that road. I'm not sure how we got there.
Education.
Oh yeah, education. But yeah, and I was talking about student loans, and I do want to give a shout out to studentloanjustice.org, who does some really good work on this. And keeps up to date on a lot of the issues, and is working very hard to try to restore bankruptcy rights to student loan debt, because that's one of the things that needs to be done. Because with these changes in the big beautiful bill that are going to limit who can qualify for public service loan forgiveness or for the income-based retirement, we're going to start seeing a lot of people defaulting on their student loans. A lot of them.
Which is also going to horribly impact the economy, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
You know,
yeah, and
something that's already not going very well at this moment. You know?
Yeah. Well, I'm an advocate for free college education because it serves the public good.
And didn't we used to have free public education? I think it was taken away under Ronald Reagan, wasn't it?
Well, California did.
Okay.
I don't think that everywhere did. And this is,
I think
again,
it was a state issue.
Yeah. And, the cost of it, this is, again, education apocalypse 2.0. The cost of education has just kept going up and up and up. And you'll see memes about this where it's like, the boomers used to be able to work, a summer job and pay for their entire, college education for the next year. And that's true to some extent. But now no one can do that. And I don't know what the statistics are now. I know that when we were all in grad school together, I think the school we went to, it was like $16,000. That's the starting, and I don't know how much the housing on student campus would have increased all of that. I'm sure it did. And right now, I would imagine it's probably in some places gone up to $20,000. And so students have to take on these loans if they want an education. It's indentured slavery.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. So fun times. I'm gonna have a drink.
Okay. I probably should refill mine. Hold on.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to do a refill on this one because normally I just do one, but I think today we're going to have to do two. Is there anything that either of you want to add about our education? We should probably do a education apocalypse 2.0 at some point.
We're going to have to do 2.0 on a lot of things, I think.
Yeah.
Maury Todd points out that maybe what we want to do is teach people why cheating is bad. Get at the base. And
yeah, well, we need some good role models that demonstrate that. Maybe.
Yeah. When you have that at the very top, what can you expect?
Right.
When you go down the list.
When somebody starts a fraudulent university and uses that to steal money from people, what does that teach you about university systems?
Yeah.
But I think we're ready to move on to
what's the next one?
More beautiful things in the bill.
Right.
The beautiful, the tremendous, it's amazing.
Most beautiful thing that ever happened. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Maybe the cuts to the social safety net.
Healthcare in particular, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we've got different statistics in regards to this, but according to the Congressional Budget Office, we're looking at an estimated insurance loss for at least 16 to 17 million Americans. Now, and this is something that terrifies me personally because I get my health care, because this is, we keep thinking about Medicare and Medicaid, but this is also going to affect the Affordable Care Act because they've been trying to get rid of that for a very long time. And they are going to eliminate a lot of the state subsidies. And, those costs go up at least 10% every year. And now it's going to go up even more. It's going to just price people out.
Right.
Yeah.
And what most people don't understand about the Obamacare is that it has different names in different states. So they think, oh yeah, get rid of Obamacare, get rid of the ACA, but it's their program that they're getting rid of.
Yeah, and that's true for Medicaid too. That's actually a point
Right.
I wanted to make about Medicaid, because I've seen a lot of people online comment, well, it doesn't affect me, but when you point out, it's like, well, but it does, So like, I just have a few examples here. So Colorado, where we are, it's Medicaid is Health First Colorado. It doesn't say Medicaid, right? And if you're like,
Yeah.
well, Medicaid doesn't, that doesn't affect me. I'm on Health First Colorado. Well, guess what? It does affect you. And so like in Alaska, Denali Care. Connecticut, it's Husky Health. Maine is Maine Care. These are all Medicaid. These are all Medicaid. And the Affordable Care Act, people don't, we've had enough of an issue where people weren't actually identifying that the Affordable Care Act is Obamacare.
Right.
Yeah. And go ahead.
No, I was just going to point out that before the Affordable Care Act was implemented, healthcare was the number one driver of bankruptcy in this nation. The number one.
Yep.
And we're already starting to see some of these in terms of, I can never say this, rural.
Rural.
Yeah, rural. I always think of the 30 Rock joke with the musical and the song The Rural Juror.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But we're already seeing some of these hospitals close. And I can speak personally. I've got an aunt who has dementia, and my uncle, who is 78, he can't take care of her anymore. It just became too much. And so she's been placed in a home, and she hasn't worked for a long time. I think she lost her last job when she was like 60 or something. And she was never, she tried to get other work. She just couldn't. My uncle worked for the local power plant. So he had a city job. They're not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. By any stretch of the imagination. And this is in Indiana. And so he applied for Medicaid because my aunt's in a home, and he was denied. And it costs like $10,000 a month.
Oh my God.
To keep her in that home. So that she can get the care that she needs. And my uncle, again, he's 78. He's actually talking. He said, well, maybe I'll just sell the house and live in my truck.
Wow.
That's where we are as a nation. And that's before these cuts go into effect.
Right.
And it's like, well, when we look at the cuts, over a certain amount of time, it's like over $1 trillion, isn't it?
Yeah,
in Medicaid, Medicare, if you combine them together.
Yeah.
And you look at that going, we have paid into these things so that they are there for us all of our lives, well, since we're able to work at least. And now these things are not going to be there for us while we have tax cuts. Miraculously in about the same amount of money for the billionaires, for our oligarchs. And when you look at that, it's like, why are we propping up these few and decimating the many? I mean, at some point, this just implodes your society, right?
Right.
If I can't, not even just for me. If my sister and I can't help support my mom, and we all have parents at various ages right now that where they're getting up there as Gen Xers,
right.
If we already get these massive bills before we're even at that age, then what are we going to do when we are that age?
Right.
That says to me that we may never be able to retire.
Right.
It's basically you're working yourself until you're dead. And, there is no benefit and I think that really needs to go out to the populace in a way they can hear. There is no benefit to this bill.
Yeah.
None at all.
I wonder how much people understand how much $1 billion is.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because billionaires don't need a freaking tax cut.
Right.
You can't. I would like to. I mean, here's a challenge. Give me $1 billion and let me see if I can waste it throughout my life.
Yeah.
What's left of my life.
Yeah.
Because I don't think I could.
Yeah, I've thought of that a couple of times. Like, could I even realistically spend half of that? No.
Yeah.
Right.
Lori on our comments says hospitals closing all over the country will impact everyone. Yeah, definitely.
Yep,
because
definitely.
A lot of rural hospitals are already shuttering.
Yeah.
Two Travelers says Putin must be watching all of this with a bag of popcorn. And I've thought of that a couple of times. That he's this is probably one of his most successful psychological campaigns against the world. Just have us go at each other. The divide in the U.S. is so great.
Yeah.
That he didn't have to lift a finger, did he?
Not really. Just click a button on a mouse. That's probably the most he exerted himself. Yeah. So I think that with the healthcare cuts, that's going to have some very dire consequences. And then, looking at just the cuts to education as well, we're going to put ourselves behind. We are on the border of resolving so many different health issues that it's like, no, we're not going to fund cancer research anymore.
Right.
Good luck with that. And we've got, the largest, I wasn't prepared for this, but we've got like the largest measles outbreak.
Yeah.
In like 100 years or something. They are trying to, they're limiting like COVID vaccines. And I know there are some issues. I know some people have had detrimental responses to the vaccines, and I don't want to minimize that. But that's a small minority. I was personally very grateful for the vaccine and continue to be grateful. But also I'm grateful for like flu shots every year. And, the idea that if I buy my lettuce or my spinach at the grocery store, it's not going to kill me with listeria.
Right.
Yeah, right. This is truly the public good that you have these agencies that watch over, the farming process, the manufacturing process, all of these things that our government agencies, FDA and EPA, look into to make sure that things are safe. Now, we can make an argument that, there have been problems with these agencies over time as they get
there certainly have been.
whittled down and people get paid off. But the answer isn't to get rid of them. It's to make them better.
Right. Fix the problems in the system. Or if you have a better system, you can add that, but then don't take away the system until you have a better system.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think more people need to read Sinclair Lewis about how our sausages are made.
Well, both of his books, right? Well, he has more than two, but the Jungle, and It Can't Happen Here. Right? Both of these books are very prescient now as we look at all the outbreaks that are occurring.
Yeah. Well, and I think that what we have going on now, this is the culmination of something that has been in the works for a very long time. And I don't know that people necessarily get that. I can take it back, to the 1800s. But if we want, we can really just kind of focus on the aftermath of World War II And you have had this group of people for a very long time, business leaders, who have wanted to dismantle the New Deal. And the way that they have done that is by co-opting religious groups and getting voters concerned about cultural issues to vote for candidates who are like, yes, I'm going to oppose abortion. But the candidate doesn't really give a crap. What they really give a crap about is dismantling the Social Security net that FDR put into place. And we're seeing the culmination of that now. You know, this is their success. And it's been this language, and the language, it drives me nuts of, well, that's socialist, you're a communist, and blah, 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 blah. And so many people have no clue what any of those terms mean.
Right.
No.
And they have no idea that there used to be a thriving Christian socialism in this nation. And that Christianity is kind of socialist by nature.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, the cult of the individual has been hyper-extended in our country, and it's destroying the fabric of society, because if you're just an individual, there's no society.
Yeah. Well, and that's something that's been there from the very beginning. You know, I always kind of point out to Alexis de Tocqueville and his Democracy in America. And he was touring, you know, the early nation in the very early part of the 1800s, right, in the 19th century. And one of the things that was really, that he was very fascinated with is this individualism. And what the early Americans kept telling him, or what they kept referring, was self-interest properly understood. And it's that properly understood that we have forgotten, because in their answer was this idea that self-interest properly understood was that, yeah, you want to work on your own success, but you cannot succeed if the community doesn't succeed.
Right.
You can't make that divorce, right? And so that I can only achieve, you know, I can only succeed if those around me are doing well.
Yep.
And I think that idea of individualism was really capitalized on by Ayn Rand in Objectivism. You know, where and that's where it becomes very popularized, because what Ronald Reagan, Alan Greenspan, a bunch of Reaganite politicians at the time were very enamored with Ayn Rand and that individualism. And you know, if you read which one is it, the Fountainhead or the other one?
Atlas Shrugged.
Atlas Shrugged. Both of these, you know, are proponents of that rugged individualism. Those people who have the bravery to put forward the risk, and how they are horribly punished for this, you know, by having to pay their workers. You know, or the unionization of jobs, you know, is really a theft from those with the capital. And that is something that I think kind of poisons the well further in the United States. You know, as people really thought that that makes a lot of sense. You know, we shouldn't have unions, you know.
Well, I mean, that was part of the social gospel in that era, excuse me, was the advent of unions. And, you know, I mean, so that, you know, 10-year-olds aren't working in factories anymore. You know, but the other thing I would add, also kind of pointing to the end of World War II, is our biggest, what was perceived as the largest threat to the U.S. hegemony was the USSR. And, you know, they were the godless communists. And so at that point, becoming Christian was seen as patriotic duty. And I always like to give the statistics that at the time of the American Revolution, only like 18% of people identified as being Christian. And that statistic held up until the beginning of the Civil War. And it was after the Civil War that you started seeing more people identifying with Christianity. And I think that the reason for that is because more people were in larger cities rather than in the frontier, because in the frontier, it's very difficult to be a member of a church. But when you're in a settled city, it's a little bit easier to get that community. But it was after World War II when being Christian became patriotic duty. So that by the time that Ronald Reagan was elected president in 1980, the number was like 90%.
Wow.
Of Americans identified as Christian. But it was this marriage between Christianity and nationalism. And we're seeing that, you know, the effects of that playing out right now.
I would also say that during these times of stress in the United States, you know, through the Civil War, through World War II, you also had a very strong apocalyptic message. Right? We had a message of, you know, that the end was nigh. And you know, in the Civil War, it's due to, you know, the nation fighting itself. It's the only time we've had war on the home front, right? In World War II, you know, what do we end with? Well, the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So you have this new age in which we could be annihilated very quickly. You know, during the 50s, you have the arms race with the Soviets and the U.S. So I think the apocalyptic message that both of these wars carried with it helped with the proliferation as much as what you were saying, Nick, with that tie into nationalism.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And the whole idea of apocalypticism and the ending of the world kind of inspires people, well, I got to do stuff now. So it encourages that individualism as well.
Well, I would argue that Protestant Christianity is really what encourages individualism, because salvation is an individual thing.
Right.
It's not collective, you know, it's not the people, you know, it's not the group of Jews that are saved. It's the individual and their relationship with Jesus. And I find that inherently narcissistic. I always use the example. I had a friend who from high school, no offense to them, they're an amazing person and they've had their own struggles. But I remember, you know, I'm a cynical asshole, but I remember they posted on Facebook many, many years ago that they announced, well, I'm an alcoholic. And I thought, okay, I give them 12 hours before they start posting about Jesus. And it was like 8. And I remember that somehow suddenly they were able to get all these like biblical quotes. And I think that's because of the Scofield Reference Bible, but that's a whole other issue. But I remember one time specifically that they posted that they got off of work and they went out to their car and their car wouldn't start. And so they were like praying to God for a ride home from work. And someone eventually, within an hour, you know, was like, yeah, I can give you a ride home. And they're like, oh, praise Jesus, praise God and everything. God's looking out for me. And I'm like, so there's genocide levels of people dying in Africa, but God can make sure that you get home from work.
Right.
It's narcissistic.
It is very much so.
Very narcissistic. God doesn't care.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at the Bible, we look at the Gospels, you know, it's very much an idea of community, right? It's not an idea of, you know, lift yourself up by your own bootstraps, you know?
Right.
It's like when you see someone in trouble, you want to help. When you have the apostles, it's a very communal thing. They early Christianity survived because of community, and it's very much there.
Yeah.
And yet, it gets repurposed for, whatever narrative you really want to pick from.
Right.
And
luckily,
so we have,
I was just going to say, luckily we can reinterpret the Bible any way we want and just pick and choose the parts that work for us. That's that individualism again, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think it stems down from that idea of salvation being individual, your relationship. We have some forms of Christianity that really promote the community, but then we have the majority of, the Protestant work ethic is that lift yourself up by your bootstraps.
Right.
And that was always a joke. How do you try it? Try lifting yourself up by your bootstraps and see how that works.
Yeah.
But we've turned it into the answer rather than the joke that it is. You can't.
Right.
It is by each other that we are able to go forward and have what we need.
Fuck everyone. I'm going to get mine.
And isn't Trump kind of the embodiment of that, though?
Yes.
The whole individualism?
Yes. There's nothing Christian about Donald J. Trump at all. I have said many times that, I'm not a Christian. And I have many reasons for not being a Christian. But if anything or anyone can convert me to Christianity, it's going to be Donald Trump, because he is the most anti-Christian human being I have ever witnessed in my life.
Right.
And at that point, I'm like, yeah, Antichrist. Well, maybe they got something going on there.
Right.
Maybe they were right after all.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. I don't know what. I know a lot of Christians see him more as a catalyst, someone who does things that will promote the end times, and so that's their reason for him.
Yeah.
I see. If to me, if you're Christian, then you don't need to promote the end times. They will come at the time that God decides, right? It's not, and this was a new invention of the premillennials. The idea that we have to help the apocalypse along. It was really something that came out of Hal Lindsey. I think I've mentioned this before.
Yeah.
That really went into Reaganism. That you don't have to worry about the environment because the end's going to come soon. And so it's
and suddenly we're back at climate change, and it all kind of ties together.
Yeah. Well, it was James. I think it was James Watts who was nominated as Secretary of the Interior under Reagan that said that during Congress, his congressional hearings. We just don't know how long it's going to be until Jesus comes back. So we're kind of running out of time. But one of the things that we actually haven't addressed yet that I think we should address in the time that we have left is ice.
Ice, yeah.
Yeah. Because the big, beautiful bill is expanding over $100 billion. And I've seen statistics that they're going to get more money than the Russian military. That's not right from the start. I checked on Snopes, and they were like, well, not right now, but possibly. Possibly. And this is what really concerns me. Yes, we've got the climate, we've got education, we got all this stuff, but it is the formation of what I see as the American Gestapo.
Yes,
absolutely.
Because these are people that are hiding their faces, and don't have any identification on them. And the argument that they're being doxxed, that's just stupid as fuck.
Right.
Doesn't matter. Yeah. Does not matter, you know, and the demolishment of due process, I think is horribly concerning. And the fact that, you know, Trump has, you know, taken, you know, had the National Guard and the Marines in various places, you know, and what we just saw in MacArthur Park in Los Angeles, that's just insanity.
And the fact that I think this is a huge one, that, you know, birthright citizenship is no longer guaranteed, even though it is part of the Constitution.
Yep. Yeah. Well, the Supreme, you know, and I do think that this is a point where nuance is important, because the Supreme Court didn't say that birthright citizenship wasn't a thing, but that the federal judges couldn't do injunctions nationwide. They could only go towards those who were like harmed. And so I saw that there has been a class action suit now being brought about for anyone who was born here to immigrant parents, because that's the class. It's a class action suit, right? But I wouldn't put it past them. Yeah,
they've never defined how birthright citizenship is going to be interpreted.
Yeah,
because if that is up for question, then who is a citizen?
Right.
And I think that's something every American should be thinking about right now.
Yeah.
And I also think, you know, talk about apocalyptic. You're born here, you've lived here all of your life, and suddenly you're being sent back to South America or Iran or you know,
or a country not of your birth.
Someplace you've never been. Yeah.
You've never been to, you don't know the language, and you're now being forced out.
Yeah.
That your whole world has ended.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, yeah, and that's been my experience with, you know, going back to teaching at East Los Angeles College, where the majority of the students were Hispanic, you know, 75% of them, 20% were Asian. And I had a lot of students who their parents were immigrants. Their parents came here, and I can't say if they came here legally or illegally, but the students were either brought here when they were very, very young or were born here. And it's like, you don't want to take someone who was brought here when they were 2 years old and say, yeah, you're an illegal immigrant. We're going to send you to this country that you've never experienced. That's not your home, but good luck.
Right.
Yeah. You know,
you say you don't want to do this, but there are people who want to do this, and that's what disgusts me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just saw a story of a woman who is of Iranian heritage. She's lived here since she was a young child.
Yeah.
And she was married. She had, I think, 3 or 4 children. She was being taken by ICE. She was in the process. She was doing everything right. I mean, she was in the process of going through, I believe, naturalization, and she was taken. She came in and told her family that she wanted to say goodbye to her children first, which she was able to, and then they took her. And someone brought up a good question, because her husband was MAGA, and he said even now, you know, he was very upset about what was going on, but he still supported Trump. So it begged the question, I think, did he call ICE on her?
Oh,
you know, someone brought up a very good point, that if you want a divorce, this was a way to not have to pay anything, you know. And I do wonder, if we have people out there who are in relationships, maybe they're not the best relationships, that their spouse could simply call ICE on them.
Yeah.
It's
right.
And maybe not. Maybe that didn't happen at all. Maybe they just, because she was in the process of it, decided that because of what was going on with Iran, she was too much of a security risk, and much like what happened to Japanese descendants in the Second World War, they found themselves in camps, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And with that, maybe we should talk about Alligator Alcatraz.
Yeah, well, yeah, we've got Alligator Auschwitz. And when I think in part of that, there are all these other aspects that are part of this, because Trump has said that he wants to see similar facilities like Alligator Auschwitz in every state, and we're seeing the I can't say this. I refilled my glass. I never refill my glass, but I did on this one. Politicization of the military. And we had this with his June 10th speech at Fort Bragg, where it was only an audience of people who were in favor of him and not the fat ones. His stupid freaking military parade with the squeaky tanks. But since he's been in office, they fired the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staffs. And, he was a black man. God forbid, DEI. And that DEI stuff is so mind-bending for me that they're like, oh yeah, we can't, they're hired just because they're black. But look at who he has in his administration.
Right.
There's like what, Thomas Fugate, 22-year-old with zero experience, none whatsoever. Being put in charge of Homeland Security, looking at terrorism prevention. White boy.
Pete Hegseth.
Hegseth. Yes.
How unqualified he is for that position.
There are more than a dozen Fox News personalities that have been put into his administration.
Yep.
And I can never get the name right, but there's Cash Crazy Eyes Patel, who is the being in charge of the FBI. The deputy director, this is one I also can't get. Dan, I always want to say Boingo, Boninjo or something like that. The deputy director, far-right podcaster. These are the most unqualified people that I've ever seen in government positions. And they're like, let's get rid of DEI because it needs to be fair. It needs to be merit. This isn't about merit.
Right. It's about loyalty.
It's about loyalty and being white and having a penis for the most part. I mean, I can't speak for Linda McMahon or Pam Bondi, but I don't think they have penises, but they are definitely loyal.
They're definitely white women. But I do think that the DEI purge, the DEI movement, is a white supremacist movement.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, certainly.
These are people who want to keep the status that they have by virtue of being white in America, and I think that's the issue there. We just have to say what it is. We have to. I think that's one of the things that we have to keep doing, is calling it what it is, not using the sugar-coated terms.
Well, and it's the idea going back to the ICE and as the Gestapo. This is clearly a violation of the Posse Comitatus, when he brought in the National Guard and the Marines. And this is something they want to do in every single state.
Yep.
And it's going to be blue states first. It's going to happen in Denver really soon, if it already hasn't. And, Los Angeles was just a trial run.
Yep.
Well, yeah.
But we also have, this idea that, getting rid of the due process. And what is maddening is that people don't understand that if due process doesn't apply to everyone, it doesn't apply to anyone.
Right. Right.
What's going to stop them from just starting to arrest, liberals or LGBTQ or what have you? Who are you going to demonstrate to that you're an American citizen?
Right.
If you have no due process, if they stick you in and they fly you down to El Salvador or to some prison in Africa, who are you going to show your documents to?
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. If somebody if some neighbor calls the ICE on you and say they're not a legal citizen and there's no due process, it doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter your orientation. It doesn't matter anything.
Yeah. And we already have examples of American citizens being arrested.
Yes.
I recently had a conversation. I recorded an interview this past week, and the author I was speaking to had presented at a conference in San Francisco, and she told me that there were people who had been scheduled to speak at the conference that could not get into the United States. And these are scholars that they could not get into the United States. And we've seen examples of various tourists that have tried to come in and have been held for weeks and not allowed to come in. It's...
Yeah, one of the ones was it I can't remember if it was the Canadian or it may have been the person from Sweden who had the meme on their phone of a blown up head of J.D. Vance. And that's what got them stopped.
Yeah.
And so, okay, what sort of freedom of speech, freedom of, privacy,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and they could take your phone, they can look at it and say, this seems anti-Trump to me.
Right. Yeah. And this is one of the things that kills me is that some of the people I know that voted for Trump say is because Elon Musk and Trump are all about free speech and they didn't want that taken away. But this is the least free speech I've ever seen.
Yeah, they're not, that's a whole other topic. We should probably do a episode on the cancel culture apocalypse.
Yeah.
There's very little nuance on any side in terms of the cancel culture. I get the frustrations, but at the same time, they are not defenders of free speech by any stretch of the imagination.
Right.
So yeah, we should think about that when we should do the cancel culture apocalypse.
Yeah.
Because there's, people need to be called out, but then we also seem to have this lack of forgiveness, which I think is a little bit concerning. Nuance. We don't have nuance. We lack nuance anymore. I don't know. Is there anything that we're kind of out of time? Is there anything that either of you really wanted to bring to the table here on this conversation that we did not do so?
I don't know. We have new issue, new tariff insanity going on.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, economic.
That's going to go on for a while. Yeah, economic apocalypse.
Yeah. There's a lot. We're just at the beginning of the apocalypse, I'm afraid. And I also want to say that while this may be pessimistic in many ways, I don't know. I'm torn. I don't know how much hope I have. I mean, there is. We saw like the No Kings protest, which were the largest protests in American history, apparently.
Right.
My concern is that they have not been sustained. I think that the problem that we're having with those opposed to what's going on, they're like, well, yeah, we'll just show up like every other week or every 3 weeks and we'll protest and then we'll go home and everything will be fine.
Right.
And I think that in order to have any kind of meaningful change, the protests have to be sustained. There has to be boycotts. There has to be acts of civil disobedience, and so many other things.
Right.
Just showing up every 3 weeks or once a month or what have you, that ain't going to cut it. That's never cut it.
There has to be non-compliance.
Yeah.
With everything that's happening.
Yeah, general strikes. Yeah.
And general strikes, defend people who are being harmed, who are in harm's way, and show up where you can. Yeah. Also, you know, not necessarily a protest, but you know, sometimes it might mean helping someone who is in a dire situation, whether it's helping them with food, whether it's helping them with medical. Or, if you're in a position to be helpful, be helpful,
Right.
There's all sorts of ways to get involved that aren't just, go to a protest and carry a sign.
Right.
It's helping each other out now more than ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that also being kind, and it's difficult with MAGA in many ways. We need to find a way to have meaningful conversations.
Right.
And because, I've always said, I understand why Trump was elected in 2016. I get it.
Right.
Because our political system is broken. And the Democrats are totally broken right now. I mean, we can see this.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they're not doing a damn thing. Chuck Schumer writing a strongly worded letter. Give me a break. That is not what we need.
They changed the name of the bill.
Yeah.
Like,
changed the name of the bill.
Yeah. And I was like, really? Yeah. That's what you did?
Yeah. I will. I think that if I have a tombstone, what I'm going to have written on it is Bernie would have won. And I think I do think that there's a lot of common ground that we can have conversations with.
Right.
Because go ahead.
I was going to say, I think we also have to avoid the trap of, you've heard about the pediatrician who lost their job because they said for the people in Texas in the floods, well, they voted for this.
Oh, yeah.
I think we have to avoid traps like that too.
Yeah.
Because, certainly not everyone there voted for that, right?
Right.
Maybe a lot of them did, but doesn't mean everyone did. And they're people too.
Yeah.
And you don't know why they voted the way they voted. And so many children were caught up in that.
Yep.
So I think we need to, not dehumanize anyone in this whole thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. 100%. Don't dehumanize. Act out of compassion and kindness. And we can have disagreements, but we can find common ground. I mean, we've been bashing all of this, rightfully so. But I think that, MAGA members, there's a lot that they would agree with. It's just, we need to get everyone to kind of lower the defenses a little bit, to actually start listening and hearing and talking about these things. Because I don't see MAGA as the enemy. And I think this is one of the things that frustrates me is that, from a MAGA perspective, liberals are seen as the enemy.
Right.
And I don't see MAGA as an enemy. I see MAGA as an ally. But we need to be able to get to that specific point where we can find the common ground. And if we just relate to each other as these stereotypes, we're never going to get there.
Right.
And maybe this is where we insert that. Maybe that's not the right word, but talk about the Epstein files and where some of that common ground is.
Well, that's a whole other episode. We talked about that. But I mean, it's possible. I mean that, maybe, I mean, that's one of the hopes that I've expressed, that maybe that some MAGA will be like, wait a minute. If they lied to us about this, what else are they lying to us about? But we'll see how that one plays out. I think that it could be his undoing. I don't know. Maybe I'm just too optimistic. We'll see. So anyway, we've gone over an hour and a half here. So let me see if either of you have any final thoughts or nuggets of wisdom that you would like to share.
No final thoughts, no nuggets of wisdom.
Okay.
Be safe out there.
Yeah. And we didn't look at any of Jeremy's drink recipes, unfortunately, but please, where can people find you on YouTube, Jeremy?
Kill Devil Rum and Cocktails. That's KILL-DIVILL.
Yes. And he has some good drink recipes and other recipes too, like simple syrups and whatnot. All rum based.
To make your cocktails from scratch.
Yeah. Stephanie?
You can find me at theaprilfool.com.
Okay.
And it's just a blog with some of my thoughts and ideas of what to do in these times, these uncertain times.
Yeah.
And you can also find me at on Blue Sky.
Okay.
The April Fool there has a hyphen.
Okay. All right. We should put that in the show notes and the video description. For all the links. And again, I'm Nick Mather. You can find me on rebelspiritradio.com, online, YouTube, /Rebel Spirit Radio. I've got a Patreon, patreon.com/Rebel Spirit. I'm also on social media, Rebel Spirit Radio. There's a Facebook page. Just look for Rebel Spirit Radio, and you can find me on Blue Sky and Instagram and Facebook, all of it. I'm out there. So we stepped our toes into this river of our current apocalypse, but there's a lot more to talk about, to revisit as we go on. But thank you, everyone who has joined us today and those who commented. It is very, very much appreciated. And so until next time, I don't know how to end this, but
goodbye.
Yeah, I don't know. I have to come up with a nice ending. It's like, keep looking
you need
up.
A tagline.
Yeah, we need a tagline. Well, it's happy hour at the end of the world, so it's always happy hour somewhere. Drink to the end.
Drink with good spirits.
Yeah. There you go.